on some level, you probably understand or get that understanding other people helps with communication, right? Kind of like when you feel somebody understands you and gets you, you probably find it easier to listen to what they have to say. You probably find it easier to communicate with them. There's just a whole lot of things that feel good around feeling like somebody else understands you or is communicating with you, talking to you in a way that makes sense to you, is easy for you to understand, and feels natural. And today we're joined by Jay Niblick, co-founder of wisehire.com and the creator of the DISC Index. And what he's going to do for us is today he's going to coach you and me on how to use the DISC tool to improve our effectiveness in communication with our prospects and with our colleagues and team members so that we can improve our chances of success in real estate. With that, Jay, welcome to the Get Listing Summit, my man.
Thanks, buddy. Good to be here again. Always fun to just have time to hang out and talk.
I appreciate that. Jay and I were just talking before we started the interview, and it's been a little over 3 years since we had our first conversation. And it feels like it was a year ago. Time flies. Well, in the last 3 years, what's been the turnover rate in our industry? About 50 to 90% on any given year, right? That agents fall out of the industry depending on how long they're in it.
Yeah, NARPEG's it at 80 to 90%. Fail to survive.
Yeah. And yet there's some agents that have doubled every year for the last 3 years that I personally know of, who were on my first summit and then on the second one, and they're just killing it and crushing it. So where I want to start with you today is, in an industry that has an 80 to 90% failure rate, why are effective communication skills important in being able to increase the likelihood of our success?
Well, a couple of reasons, really. I mean, at WiseHire, one of the main focuses we want is to help understand what it is about the individual that's going to make them successful in a given role.
Okay.
And trying to reduce that 90%.
Okay.
We end up back down around like 30% anecdotally for our clients. So much more about, do you have the ability to communicate clearly? I mean, yes, there's admin roles, there's ISAs and TCs and all kinds of different roles, but the vast majority of the people we're talking about, the 90% failure rate, those are agents. And being able to communicate clearly is absolutely vital. I mean, it kind of shocks us half the time. I'm not sure people know, and I apologize, I got a miserable head cold, so I hope I don't interrupt myself and sound all goofy here. But if I cough, I'll just excuse myself now. It's like people didn't tell them it was a sales job. They thought they could come in and they could kind of, let's say they're more on the introverted side, not understanding how you prefer to communicate. What your preferences are for being communicated with is one thing. We'll talk about that when it comes to working collaboratively as a team. But how do I communicate? I need to know that. So when I communicate with others in a sales capacity, am I going to be in their face just overpowering? Am I going to be introverted and a little reticent and quiet? Is it even a good fit for me to get into real estate in the first place, is where we start our work at WiseHire. And then once they're in teams, how do you see how to communicate better? A team leader, how does the partner work with me better, whether it's a broker or a peer, whether I've got admins or so on and so forth. So that's one of the works. All of our customers get team profiles and we plot everybody. It's really awesome. And you get to see the different communication styles. But it's vital. It's vital if I'm going to understand I need to get into selling or I shouldn't get into selling. Because communication styles, if you're an introvert who likes to work with an insular group of people who you've known a long time, and you think you can just put some stuff out on Facebook, you know this. This is an outbound, outside hunter-gatherer sales job. You've got to have the natural communication style where you just love meeting people and you're not at all afraid to walk up to a total stranger and start talking to them or listening in on the conversation behind you at the restaurant, spinning around and saying, hey, and not feeling like, oh my God, I'm interrupting you. These are all super vital when it comes to selling, but it starts with, you have to understand that about yourself.
For the very first time that I heard about DISC, to me it was like the first thing I thought of was, it's just a personality assessment tool, right? And because I feel like there's so many of them that are out there now, there's DISC and Myers-Briggs, and I know I'm already saying inaccurate things by making them all sound the same. but I think a lot of people have this perception that they're all just personality tests, right? Quote unquote. And then they're all the same. Well, Myers-Briggs or DISC or Kincaid or whatever it's called. There's so many different things, right? What I want to ask you is why discreetly and distinctly separate from any other types of tests out there, how is it that DISC can help us improve our communication effectiveness?
Any personality assessment that you use, and there are dozens out there, has to be validated. So the first step in how will it help me improve my communication is it accurate? Because there are a lot that aren't. And there are some that are somewhat accurate for understanding your tendencies, like the MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator. It's a tendency sort of thing, not necessarily a behavioral model that it's originally related to Dr. Jung's work. And I don't want to dive too deep into any one subject, so stop me and smack me if I start geeking out. Okay. But if it's not validated, then you're starting with bad information. And the benefit of using any kind of an assessment is to not just have to look at a piece of paper and say, what are my tendencies? We did a study of 197,000 people one time over 7 years, many countries. And this is years back. And the self-awareness level on a 0 to 10 scale for the average Joe on the street was a 5.5 on 0 to 10.
Okay. 10 being super self-aware.
Yeah. So, I mean, ask somebody right now, somebody that's watching this, quickly, top 5 greatest behavioral strengths. Boom, 5 greatest weaknesses. And they immediately now start to think, well, and it'll take minutes. The really good self-aware people, it's like ingrained. It's like a laminated card in their wallet, Boom, I suck at detail. I'm great at being extroverted. I'm horrible with creating strategic plan, and I'm fantastic at meeting new people or being outgoing or pioneering new things or so on and so forth. So you got to have an accurate, validated one first. And there's a lot that aren't. DISC is a model that was created by Dr. Marston back at Harvard in 1926. He created a book called The Emotions of Normal People. So it's one of the
emotions of normal people.
Yeah, believe it or not, back then when most psychiatrists were studying people, they studied people that weren't normal. They were in what were called insane asylums back then, or asylums.
Gotcha.
And they would do all their work there. And it sounds weird, but Marston was a rebel to say, why are we studying this class of people to help understand this class of people?
Right. Why are we using
little research
outliers to understand normal people?
Very little research was done on the majority of the population. So he was really weird and going, but that's why he titled his book that. But it's the emotions of normal people. And everyone's like, huh? Well, what's that for? Right. So it's one of the oldest, most studied and behavioral models, personality assessments. It's a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is DISC a personality assessment, or really what is it? Because again, like I'm saying, there's this whole mushroom cloud around all these tests. Sure. And I think everybody's just like, personality test. And look, I'm not intelligent about it, but I have this I've read enough around personal development, personal growth to have this instinct that they are not all the same thing, right? And I think personality test is like saying, go Google it, but you're on Yahoo. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not
personality test is like a medical exam.
Okay.
It's a big umbrella that covers a whole wide variety of things. And there's motivational tests and cognitive tests and personality instruments, behavioral assessment. Marston looks at behavior. Dr. Marston, the DISC looks at behavior.
Okay.
So it's my natural behavioral style, which very much includes my communication because it's observable. The behaviors that I have are observable. I mean, I can show you actually if you want. I can share a little thing on screen here. Go like ahead. That. So this is Dr. Marston's model, and it's the 4 things that he put together. It's these 2 axes, an X and a Y. And he started realizing that we were either more task-oriented or social-oriented, extroverted or introverted. And when you lay them across each other, you get these 4 quadrants, and that's D, I, S, and C. And so that's where the name of the model came from. D is the decisive, and it's this second box down here. Is this large enough? Can you see it okay?
It is, yeah. Yep.
It's how you tend to deal with problems and make decisions, which has nothing to do with people. The interactive, the I, is how you tend to deal with people. So it's problems, people, pace, procedures, how you tend to interact with people and share opinions or want opinions shared with you. S is for stability or stabilizing, and it's pace, how you prefer to pace things in your environment.
Mm.
And C is cautiousness, originally conscientiousness, and it's procedures, your preference for established protocols and procedures. So the four don't have anything to do with each other. They're discrete, they're independent, and you can have a high or a low score. And historically, it's been on a 0 to 100 scale or a 0 to 10 scale. That's a bit of a misnomer as well, because that assumes that you have no D. And I will not geek out into this, but there's actually a meridian here, a 50% line. And that is like in the middle. And a high D, a very 90 D, is the same power as a 10 D, just in the opposite direction. So you can think of it side by side.
Gotcha.
Middle of the D's, and then you got this 95 D over here, which is very fast paced, make decisions very quickly. A 10 or a 5 D is just as strong in the opposite direction. So they want to make very slow, careful decisions. They want to be very deliberate.
I've never heard somebody explain that the four components are discrete of each other.
They are. And mathematically,
I had no idea.
This is the DISC index that I wrote. So this is my version. And validity studies, it's been used 6 million times all around the world. We've got 10,000 corporations that have used it, so we've got the validity and reliability studies to show it can be used for hiring. We've done the adverse impact studies. We've done all the other stuff that the APA recommends and the EEOC recommends. So when we use it and we say, this is what this is talking about, we know that it's accurate. And so in the formulas that calculate the DISC score, they don't tie into each other.
Mm.
Now, we don't find humans that have high DIs, S's, and C's all across the board. And
Gotcha.
having valid,
and that's where the misconception comes from, is that they're all related to each other.
Yeah, well, and it's just your natural, if you're going to want to have a very high D, it's not impossible to have a high C. We've seen it. It's just unusual. So part of that comes from the training too. Like when we do training, we hear people all the time talk. Here, I'll see if I can expand this up. You still see the whole thing?
Yep. Yeah.
When we do training, we hear people talk all the time about just D, Oh yeah, John's a high D. But you have a score in all four.
Gotcha.
And it makes a big difference because we see team leaders, believe it or not, outside of a DI, one of the more common patterns for real estate team leaders is a DC. Not so much a CD, and that is not the same. A C.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, DC versus CD.
But it's not incredibly rare. It's a more rare report. But what happens is they're great at selling. They got a high D, a pretty moderate I, let's say in the 50 range. But then the C is something that helps them create the team. Because if you think about it, you're creating a team. I have to organize things. I got to create
I see that. Neat, orderly, careful, systemic.
Policies and procedures. And here's protocols and training manuals. And, I got to teach all you people this. But when we train, oftentimes this is the mistake that's made. And we do this with an old friend of mine, a colleague, and he's kind of gone back in time and made some examples of, we talk about just a high D. And this is no bottom line. It's to the point, multitasking, demanding, competitive. That's it, period. And then, the over-exaggerated I, pure I.
Joe Bag of Donuts.
Joe Bag of Donuts. He's disorganized. He enjoys life. He's carefree. He's emotional. The high S, steady Eddie. And you'll find patterns that's all that's above the line. Just an X, or just an I, or just a D. Any combination is possible. And then, of course, the high C. We tend to poke fun at all three of these.
Yeah.
Pure high C, Tom technical, So this is where a lot of that training people just pick up on the side because they don't become experts in it. And they go, you're looking for a D. And you're on the boards, you see what people talk about in hiring. Yeah. But from a communication standpoint, people don't appreciate that it's all four.
Got it.
You really have to look at all four because I've got a score somewhere inside of me when somebody says, I got to talk to this person, they're high DI. Well, they have a C score. It may be a 12 or a 23, but it still means something.
So I know that your guys' company history is that you've had the majority of your impact so far on the real estate industry, that the majority of your guys' work as Wise Hire has been with real estate agents. I know you guys are now expanding into other industries, but with that in mind, that you guys have done so much work with the real estate industry, real estate agents, real estate teams, what is a question about DISC? What is a question about DISC that you don't hear agents, that you wish agents would ask you more often, that they don't know to ask or don't ask?
A lot of ours stop at hiring when they get in the front door. And that's one of the reasons I was excited to talk about this conversation today. It's an invaluable tool once I'm working with you. Once we're on a team, it's the communication aspect that makes all the difference in the world. Not just understanding, I'll show you some other stuff here, not just understanding my preferences, but understanding someone else's preferences. We talked about this in rare forms. I could get this on a sales prospect before I actually have the contract signed. This would be really great to have. And
Right.
if you do DISC enough, you can actually start to learn to pick some of this up, like tells and poker. But if that would be the thing, don't bring somebody onto your team and then have a wonderful time ruining them. You found somebody who's a potentially great agent, and now you just don't communicate with them, or you fight with them, or you don't care, just do whatever I tell you to because I'm the team leader. Team communication is where this thing has one of its greatest plays. And just imagine if I understand the preferences of a high D. And I can share a document with everybody that has all this captured in it, everything I'm showing here today.
That would be awesome.
This will be shared with everybody that's viewing. But imagine learning.
I'll that below the video for those of you who are watching.
Yep. Imagine the ability to understand at a much better level what high Ds prefer versus high Is. It's not about control. It's about social interaction, and they need others. You can't interact with yourself. You need others to interact with. So that social proof is important. And
in a relationship-driven business like ours, and when I say relationship-driven business, I don't mean just with prospects. I mean every relationship. The real estate agent on the other end of the transaction, real estate agents in your office, your broker, your team members. This is a 360-degree relationship-driven business, right? This is invaluable and priceless. I can't even begin to quantify. Maybe you can. I can't even begin to quantify the value that you could derive from or benefit or get from up-leveling your game, if you will, with the understanding of this.
The thing about the DISC model, Marston's model, is that it's based on natural tendencies. So some people that may know DISC say, well, there's this adaptive ability. I can change, I can adapt. That's not natural. It's a stretch. It's a rubber band. And so when I'm thinking about thinking, I can try to not be what my natural tendency is. Let's say I'm a very high D, low C. I don't like details. So when I approach somebody without thinking about thinking, I talk big picture. I talk fast. I talk, let's make decisions. Let's go now. I kick in the door. I say, shit hit the fan, fix it. And I'm out. I don't stop to talk details now. But if I'm interacting with somebody who's a high C, let's say a transaction coordinator or an administrative assistant, that's not going to work. That's going to drive them crazy. And so it's not about they're subjugated to me and they'll do what I want them to do. If you want to have a good communicating relationship, then you have to appreciate, here's my natural tendency. And I can try to adapt it, but it's going to sling back to where I am when I'm not thinking about it. And so I have to appreciate what that impact of that is. In the report, we talk about preferences for communication, do's and don'ts. I'll show you a picture of that. But this is why I need to understand this. What are the preferences? What's that person going to want when it comes to communicating? What are the best ways to communicate? And I've got some other slides on this. I'll walk through the D's and the I's, S's and C's in more detail here in a minute. But I need to understand the general characteristics. This is all about communicating. This person is likely to want to be very stable and take their time and relaxed. They tend to be resistant to change. I'm describing a very high S without anything else to challenge it. Another D, I, or C.
Right.
If they're a high I, they're going to want to talk. and they're going to want to interact and they're going to want to share. And you put two high eyes in a room and you're probably going to have to say, guys, timer started, stop talking in 5 minutes. We got to get back to work. You know, the two C's on the team are great, but they're going to tend to possibly become overly pedantic and want to, fixate on getting things done. But then thank God we've got C's on the team, because the D's and the I's would come up with 1,000 ideas and none of them would ever make it to fruition, because it's just the next innovative idea after the next. And, oh yeah, I guess we forgot the details of ever actually executing on that. So that's why it's important to have an understanding of all of this stuff.
What are some super simple Simon for a high D like me, super simple Simon, steps I can start taking and to implement DISC in my communication with another? Is it I look at that quadrant before I talk to somebody? I'm like, okay, I'm about to talk to a high I. This is how they want me to talk to them. At least try to formulate some communication style before I get on the phone with them or meet them face to face.
Get their profile, right?
Okay.
And it is a part of attending this.
If you can get their profile. Otherwise, you have them to guess, right?
Get a link for the profile. Come over to WiseHire and get that. We'll give you the link for this one. Look at it and read it. And I'm a high DI, and so
yeah, me too.
My eye tends to this is not me, this is a fake report, but I'm up in the DIs as well, and I've got a very low S, and I don't even know what my C is,
okay,
because it's just low. So get the report, step one. Step two, read the report. If you're a high D, force yourself to read as much of it as you can. If you're a high C, you're going to read the majority of it, probably the S's as well. There's a page in the report that when it comes to communicating, sorry to make everybody dizzy here.
It's all right.
Communication styles, and this is a DISC Plus, so it's got a little bit more.
And while you're finding it, just to interject, you guys are giving out the test, the DISC assessment for free to everybody here on the Get Listening Summit, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
So that's linked. There's a link to that below Jay's interview here, so click on that. And is this the report that they'll get?
This is the DISC report. Yeah, this is a DISC Plus. It's got a couple extra pages in it, but everything you see in the DISC portion we're rolling through now is the exact same.
So as you're hearing Jay share this, just know you can get your hands on something like this for yourself, and it's on the house. WiseHire is giving it away generously for everybody here on the Get Listening Summit. Just want to clarify that for everybody. Okay, perfect. Please continue.
And this page, Communication Insights.
Got it. Okay, that's what I was looking for.
This is the one, so you can put just this one page. If you've got a team, we recommend printing one out for everybody next time you have a meeting or something like that. Print one out for everybody, and they all pass it around. So I get to keep my own DISC profile, and you get to keep yours, but we all share this one page, and we all walk out with a page from everybody there. And it's the simplest thing to do. Read this before you walk in the freaking door and say something. Read this before you walk into the meeting, and remind yourself, learn this. Here's the things to do when it comes to effectively communicating with this individual. Be efficient, hit the major points first, be prepared, do the homework. To avoid, here's the things to avoid. Don't use unreliable evidence and testimonials. You should be sitting down if you really want to work with your team well, especially as a team leader. You need to learn these things and understand these natural traits. One, as a team leader, you're going to see conflict. You're going to see two people bump into each other, and you're going to use this. You can use this very effectively to say, well, I know why you guys are doing this. I know what's going on here. Johnny, you got to admit, you suck at details, and you get pissed off every time that he says something about, I got 20 more questions.
Right.
So I know, I can see this happening live right here in front of me. From a managerial standpoint, this is incredibly valuable. But you learning it about yourselves, even if you don't have a report on the other individual, if you start to find yourself having conflict, if you start to find yourselves butting heads, or there's a specific individual on the team that you don't have the report on, go to them, have them get their own profile and share it. But even if not, know that, well, here's my tendencies, and I'm guessing that they don't want to come across this way. And that's probably where we're butting heads.
If you woke up tomorrow morning and had the power to download and install a piece of software into every real estate agent's brain through a communication software, just give everybody a 2.0 update, okay? What are three communication or behavioral awareness habits that you would universally want to download and install or upgrade into every agent's mental operating software that you know universally across the board would improve self-awareness, awareness of others, and effective communication in general? What would be three habits that people can that you would upgrade everybody with?
Well, habit number one: stop and think before you speak. And I know that our natural tendencies are going to be what we just talked about. I naturally communicate this way. I naturally act this way. I naturally behave this way. And everything. Ask me a question. I go, boop, here's the answer. Mm-hmm. Or the opposite. So stop and think. When it comes to communication and team, and that's the specifics of your question, stop and think about who you are and what your message is going to be and who you're communicating it to before you do anything. That helps you break out of the natural tendency. And when we're dealing with others, we can't afford to be selfish and say, hey, I'm going to talk the way I'm going to talk, and I want to behave the way I behave, and y'all got to deal with it. That's not how society works, unfortunately. It's not how the team works specifically. So that's number one, stop and think. Number two, appreciate that what you're saying is known to you and every possibility to be interpreted in the wrong way. Because key number three is when you get into a loggerhead with somebody else, when there's a communication issue, when you guys aren't talking or you're fighting or it's just pissing each other off, the third link is stop and go back to it's most likely along the lines of miscommunication. Let me show you something here to support this. Here's something that people don't appreciate. It's really easy to understand, but it's even easier to forget. So looking at this graph, the number one reason for conflict in a team, miscommunication, conflict in a team, is because here's the key, we interpret others' emotions through our own behavioral filters. So let me give you an example, because I don't know yours. If I don't have your disc, if I don't have your personality, if we haven't worked on a team and we haven't learned why we say the things we say and why we ask all these questions or why we don't want to ask all these questions or why I want to sit there, why I don't want to talk, we just assume that they're like me. Everybody I assume is like me. It's the only reference I have. When I hear or observe behavior, I run it through my own emotional filter. So let me give you the example. And this usually happens when you're at odds in what I call a channel. So looking at this graphic, there's 4 channels. It can be really high or really low. If I'm a high I and I'm sitting in front of a team or a room talking and I see a bunch of people sitting there just going, and they're not interacting. Yeah, I'm making some key points and they're just kind of like, check pulse rate. You there? Come on. I'm interpreting that behavior through my own emotions because I say the question in my head goes, in order for me to behave this way, I would have to feel and insert answer here.
Bored, uninterested, what
would a high I?
A lot of negative associations.
Exactly. What would it take for a high I to sit there and act like that?
Right.
I don't have a disc on them. I don't know. I haven't stopped to learn. So I assume they are like me and a high I, and therefore that behavior means exactly what you just said. They're bored. They think I'm an idiot. They're not engaging. They don't like me, And so now I start to formulate an opinion that's wrong and I respond to it. So I start to ratchet it up. I'm like, come on, everybody, let's get going. What do I got to do to get you excited? Well, that might be freaking excited for them. It might be a 22I. They may be super excited. 99S,
Yeah.
Same thing. Low C, sitting in a room with a high C. And the high C, let's say I'm up in front of the room again and I'm saying, here's a big picture idea, guys. Here's what I want to do. And the high C starts asking questions. 98C, 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions, 5, 10, Well, but what about playing devil's advocate? But we don't have, but I don't, but, Now, a low C is going to look at that behavior and think, in order for me to get that anal retentive, to get that pedantic, to get that nitpicky and perfectionistic and methodical, I'd be trying to submarine this idea. I'd be trying to torpedo this puppy. I'd be trying to piss him off because I'm just looking
to see that other person as a foe, as your enemy, as your adversary.
Yeah. Now, that high C in all reality is probably wanting to make sure this thing goes off without a hitch and loves the idea, but maybe they're a low I, high C. So they didn't stop to be all effusive and go, fantastic idea, Andre. Oh my God, this is awesome. Now, there's 23 things I think where could this go wrong. Let's do a SWOT analysis and make damn sure it goes out the door because it's perfect. No, right. They just immediately start thinking like a tax accountant that goes, well, but, you know. But I assume they're trying to torpedo me. I assume
you're interpreting it through your own understanding of how of what would cause you to behave that way.
Yeah. It goes the other way. I've seen high C's in a room with a bunch of low C's. And they say, well, with all the typos and details in here that are wrong, you don't care. You don't care, do you? You're just sloppy. This is an important project to you. You know, how could you dare turn in something that has this typo in it or this mistake or is an hour late or, you know, deadlines and details and all that? They assume because of the behavior that they would have to be feeling, the emotions they would have to be feeling in order to behave that way. That's actually the emotions that the person has. And they proceed accordingly. You know, low S's think high S's are afraid. Because they're like, come on, let's go. It's brand new. Let's jump out of the plane, you know?
Right, because they're spontaneous, impetuous, active, restless.
And high S's think that low S's are, high S's think low S's are impetuous and don't care. And, you know, if it's a big business project, they should take more time and they don't respect the project. And low I's think high I's, or low I's think high I's are egotistical and showy. And all they want to do is rule the conversation.
Got it. That makes so much sense. This is so helpful and so valuable and so common sense. Like once somebody can explain it to you like this, and that your illustration is a really valuable component of this. Well, at least for a visual person like me, I guess. Again, see, I'm filtering it through my own perception of value. So it makes so much sense. So the three mental software habits is stop and think. Appreciate what you're saying is known to you, but can be 100% misunderstood or misinterpreted by somebody else.
Yep.
And habit number 3 was if there's an issue, and I didn't write that down fast enough. If there's an issue, it's probably go back to a communication issue. Is that what you said?
The number one reason we see people get in arguments on a team or in a group is because they've got drastically different communication styles. Now, it's not the only one, obviously.
Sure.
Be a Cowboys fan or an Eagles fan or, you know, all kinds of different reasons. But normally, that's the most common thing we see. So when the proverbial shit hits the fan, and it usually will at some point, you want to go back and say, all right, don't react. What is it and why is it possibly happening?
And so then you summarize that with the number one reason for conflict oftentimes is we interpret others' behaviors through our own personality or our own perception of how you would behave in that way, which again, as you just very masterfully explained or demonstrated, we're filtering that through our own perception of how we would behave that way, why we would behave that way. But if they're different, they might be damn excited in that chair, but they're staying super quiet and monotone.
And you know they're different, and I just don't know how different. You know, and this is the vast majority of the world doesn't walk around with disc profiles on the people on their team. They don't.
Yeah.
Nor even stop to think about it.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. Let's say that there's been some ongoing conflict between me and somebody else, a fellow professional. It could be as close and intimate as on the same team. Maybe it's a little bit more distant, like in the same brokerage location, building, right? But it's a fellow professional. And let's say that there's been a history of conflict, tension, miscommunication, right? It's not a pleasant, there's always tension every time we're around each other at this point. How do I go about broaching the subject of, hey, I listened to this interview with this guy, Jay, talked about this disc stuff. Would you be open to us both taking this test and like figuring out if maybe what we're having is just massive misunderstanding, but we actually might like each other or want the same thing? my question fundamentally is like, how does somebody, if there's a history of tension, sometimes at some point, like anything one of the parties puts on the table is immediately rejected or criticized, you know what I mean? Or there's just immediately like there's a pre-framed bias to reject. How does one use this? How can one communicate the opportunity for this as like a positive and say, hey, do you think we could use this to improve our working relationship without seeming like weird or trying to like figure the other person out or manipulative or with an agenda? Does that all make sense? Like, how do you bring somebody to the table with this and say, hey, maybe we need a reset?
Well, I mean, I think it would just probably be done that way. And it depends on your personality. You know, I mean, I'm a high D. So my best friend back in school was a guy named Vince, and we got in a fist fight the first week I'd moved to town and beat the hell out of each other. And, you know, very few best friends that close ever since. So, you know, sometimes you're at loggerheads and you got two very similar personalities and, you know, end up beating it out. I mean, not physically like I'm talking about as a kid, but sometimes you just gotta, you know, go at it that way. If that person's an also similarly high D, and you say, look, I'm not going to take it personally. I've been an ass, you've been an ass. Let's just figure this stuff out. Because me, if I understand what makes them tick, I just want to make more money here. I want to grow the team. I want to be successful. If you're talking to somebody who's a high S, there may be some real pent up and frustration there with something that you've been doing to miscommunicate in a way that you didn't know because they're perceiving your behaviors through their own emotional filter, like we were just talking about. And high S's are notoriously bad. Really high pure S's are notoriously bad for passive aggression because they want stability. And so they tend to suppress things. They're not likely to jump out real quick, you know, and say, hey, that pissed me off. Why are you doing that? You know, you don't necessarily know it for a long time. And so you got to sit down with those individuals differently. I think your best approach is to go to them and say, look, here's what I want to do. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're interested in it and you put forth a mutual cause, we got to work in this group together. If you're interested in making a difference in it, if it doesn't bother you, then okay. But I think we're missing out on business opportunities. And in the end, that's all I care about.
That makes sense. And when it comes to working with prospects, transitioning here just a little bit with the time that we have left together, when it comes to transitioning, when it comes to working with prospects, you don't have a disc profile on them, but can you give us, is there possible, like, is there 1, 2, or 3, like, verbal assessment tools or speech patterns you can use or questions you can use to kind of ascertain if it isn't already obvious to you from how the person behaves, kind of what kind of personality, what kind of behavioral personality they are so that you can improve your communication effectiveness with them?
Yeah, I'll show you some slides here. I think there's a key distinction to be made. When I'm in sales mode, it's not about me. I have to adapt. I have to modify my behavior. I have to pay attention to trying to understand what you're asking about, which we'll answer here in a second. It has to be a fair when it's on a team or business together, not a client relationship. I have to demand that respect. So it depends on the personality. I'm not saying, you know, you'll be able to go to this individual or those that are listening that have this and resolve it. Sometimes it can. Sometimes if you can get them to understand maybe what's a communication issue, great. It won't always happen. Sometimes you just got to go to war. You know, say, hey, you know, I'm going to have to take you out because I'm here and I want to work here and you're annoying. And so, you know, we're going to battle because what doesn't work is for then you to say, well, I'm going to adapt all day. I'm going to suck it up and just not be happy here or there. But when it comes to selling, I'll show you the things to be watching for. So high D strengths as the person approaches you, as you talk to them on the phone, as you interact with them in the early days before you even have a contract. High Ds are ego strengths. You know, they're impatient. They desire change. They feel loss of control and they want very direct answers. So you'll see this fast-paced, you know, high ego strength. You know, they're going to be like, this guy thinks or the lady, because there's just as many high D women as there are men, believe it or not. You know, they're big on risk. So you start to see, you know, the ego, you start to see the risk. You start to see somebody who's impatient. You start to see somebody who's like that. Then the odds are pretty good you've got a D. Now, there's an IS and C score, but for these purposes, if I can see that, I know I need to adapt my sale to that.
Got it.
Okay. If I get somebody who's high I oriented, you're going to see it. They're very people oriented. They care about what people think. They want to always be unique and stand out. They're big on unique messages. They like to interpret things differently. So I don't want my house to look like every other house on the street. They're okay on innovation, turning off the beaten path. They're okay with experimentation. They don't mind doing some risky things because they can be innovative and oftentimes associated with a D as well. So if you see these things, you know that you can probably approach them. D's and I's, I'll show you the early adopter here in just a second, versus S's and C's. They tend to group off on their own. So those two, much more loyal, much more family oriented, much slower pace. The biggest thing here is they're very collaborative. They want to work with you. You'll sense all this. They're very sincere. They're not demanding and driving. On a team, they're usually the big steadfast anchor. And so you can just tell they're like a sea anchor. Everything with a high S is calmer and slower. Even in the early stages, you're like, wow, I just feel safer around this person. And if you hit a bunch of C's, then they're usually pretty easy to tell as well. Okay. Straight to the point, don't mess around. Very much about education, details, facts, knowledge, very analytical. They're very black and white to an impractical sense many times.
Gotcha.
It's an outhouse. How's it out of order? These are concrete stairs to a beach in Australia. How are they out of order? Right or wrong, it's just black and white.
Got it.
So the earliest innovators from a sales perspective are Ds. So if you're talking with a D, then you'll also sense that they're ready to go fast. They're ready to jump right in. They want to talk big picture, and they'll innovate. They'll go. Early adopters, Ds, and then Is. So I still actually follow Ds as far as moving because they'll look for more social proof. The beginning of a social proof. Early majority, that's where the S comes in because they want the majority of the social proof. So brand new, never sold anything before, but I'm going to give you the best price, and I guarantee you I'll work harder than anyone else, and the high D's okay with that. The S, they want the majority to late majority. So it's like, once you've sold 20 houses and you've been doing this for X many years, I'll be a lot more comfortable coming back to you and letting you sell my house then. But I want ability. I don't want innovative practices. They move from late majority into even the non-adopters with a C, where it's like, don't say this is the first time we've done this. Don't say that we're creating this new novel, innovative way to sell houses. And, this is the thing that people don't stop to think about either is you put out a universal message, you're likely to alienate half your audience. So let's say you go, we're going to market with the most cutting edge, innovative, new technologically advanced ways to get your house listed. The first place discs scores is S. The most common, highest one in the country, in the United States at least, is S. Followed by I, then C, then D. D is the smallest percentage. So if you walk out the door and say, brand new, cutting edge, innovative, create all this stuff.
Instead of like predictable, proven, consistent.
Stable, secure, proven, social proof on my website. Here's what John had to say. Here's what Mary had to say. That's what the first place people like. S is stop on the street. The odds are you'll run into an S more than flipping a coin for any of the others.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But there's the trouble with it. If you don't know, then you're going to alienate the Ds who may be a better client for you because they'll decide quickly and they'll be like, I'll take more risk and I'll go for this or that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Awesome. Well, Jay, this has been very, very, very valuable. And really grateful, and thank you for all the free tools that you're going to offer, that you're giving away here to everybody on the Get Listing Summit. For those of you who are listening and watching, right below this video is a link, and it goes to the free disc assessment tool from Wise Hire, and you can go check that out. Get that report. Get everybody on your team. If you're working with people, if you have a partner, if you have colleagues or peers that you work closely with, or if you have a team, send everybody to it. Everybody gets their own report. Then like Jay shared, you can share the communication insights page with each other. I think that's incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for that, Jay. On behalf of everybody here at the summit and myself, thank you for this interview.
Oh, thank you, man. I always appreciate it. You guys are doing great stuff over there, so keep it up.
I appreciate it. And also, I want to take a minute to acknowledge you for just the work that you're doing in refining a topic that's so complex, can be so complicated. And I mean, at least for me, being a high D and a high I, you've really created you've simplified a lot of this stuff just in 45, 50 minutes of conversation. You've managed to simplify it and help me understand it so much better. And I think that's a gift that you're actually contributing to the world at large, right?
Well,
right, not primarily in the real estate industry, but at large, you're contributing it. And I hope so. I want to acknowledge you for that, and two, I want to just say that I hope that you're able to continue to impact many people in the real estate industry and beyond and outside the real estate industry. So I want to acknowledge you for that. This is really powerful and valuable what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I feel the same. I think if somebody's not bringing together people like this in a concentrated effort to help the rest of the industry improve and grow, then they're just running around, disorganized and flittering about. So I think this is great that you're doing this, and it's a core concentration that brings all these people into one place, because that's incredibly valuable.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
All right, dude. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.